Hey YouTube, how's it going? Today I have another 12 by 12 by 18 Exo Terra. If you remember the last one I did, there was a lot of foam, a lot of carving, and unfortunately a lot of scrap that's completely useless and ends up going right in the trash. So with that, I think I'm done with foam. No matter what size project I'm working on, big or small, I feel like at least half of a can of foam is wasted every time I put one down. Which is why today's video is going to be completely foam free, and instead I will be using scrap pieces of carbonized cork left over from previous projects, which is the perfect example of one of the biggest benefits of carbonized cork, in that every single scrap piece, whatever you're doing, is useful somewhere down the line. So for those of you who aren't familiar with carbonized cork, it comes in sheets, usually 12 by 36 inches, varying thicknesses from half an inch all the way up to, I've seen, 5 inches. Obviously, the thicker it gets, the more expensive it is, but for most of your backgrounds, a 2-inch sheet should work just fine. So at the end of putting down all these pieces, I kind of realized that it's probably not the best method I used here. Putting the pieces down, then filling in the gaps with silicone, and then trying to wedge in these smaller chunks to fill the gaps in. Then once I had all the gaps filled in, I took some cocoa core and started filling in all the tiny spaces where I couldn't get to, giving it a good shake to make sure everything's settled. Let it sit for 2 hours, and then dumped off all the excess, and this is what we're left with. So when I started on the other two sides, I kind of realized my mistake on the back portion, and this time I decided I was going to spread out a nice thick layer of silicone, press in the pieces, and then fill them in with the smaller bits like I did on the other side, but this time they kind of fell into place a little bit better. And you can probably notice here what I'm doing is starting off with the biggest pieces and then working my way down to the smaller bits. Once I have all those pieces in, I'll dump some cocoa core on, press it in. You just make sure you don't rub your hand across the top because you end up peeling some pieces off. And then for good measure, I'll give it a few taps. Then once it's dried after about 2 hours, go ahead and take a brush and knock down any loose pieces. And once that's done, we're ready for the background pieces. Here I'm using the cork bark tubes. I like standing up my terrarium when I'm setting the pieces in there. It gives me a better feel and look at how it's going to turn out. A good way to get your pieces set into place really quick is what I'm doing here, which is just some tissue paper and some super glue. You just want to make sure that you get good contact between the two. You don't want to have any gaps in there because the super glue is actually pretty brittle on its own, but when it's soaked into something, it gets hard as a rock. So once you have all your pieces set in place, I like to let it set for at least 15 minutes or so, just to make sure that everything's solid. No use in rushing anything here. And I'll come back, and as you can see, it's all pretty solid and ready for some silicone to cover up that tissue paper. One thing I do when I go over it with silicone is I'm not just hiding the pieces, but I'm actually adding a little bit extra around those joints to make sure everything's really secure. Then once all your silicone's down, just go ahead and cover it up with whatever you normally use. Now the next pieces I'm adding here are liana vine. They come in different lengths and thicknesses, and just to add a really natural look to the enclosure you're building. So once I have these set in place, I'm going to go ahead and silicone them in. And then just like before, I'll take some cork bark and cover the silicone up. Then I'm going to let this set for about 8 hours or so, and then take it over to the sink and give it a good wash down. The cocoa core I've had that I've used on this is it's pretty old now. It's come from a lot of different projects, so all the big pieces are getting used up, and it's just turning into really fine dust that gets everywhere. For the drainage layer on this enclosure, I'm going with foam. Here I've cut it in half. It just makes it easier to get underneath the cork bark tube. So once I have these down, then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to cover everything in sphagnum. In my opinion, I think when you use the foam blocks like this, there's really no need for the mesh. I know plant roots will grow in there, but there's really no difference in that, and the roots growing through the screen, it's still going to rip everything out. So once I have my sphagnum down, I'm going to go ahead and get my substrate mix out, cover everything up, really make sure I get back behind the cork bark tubes. And now we're about ready to plant. So the first one I'm going with here is a Monstera Steplicana, I think is how you pronounce it. I've got a ton of this stuff from my previous terrarium I tore down. This one here, I'm sure everyone recognizes, lemon button fern. It really likes to spread out with those runners. And of course, you can't have ferns without moss or moss without ferns. So here's some cushion moss. And then I'm going to put some more cushion moss here. It's kind of in a shaded area, kind of where the light's going to come through, half in the shade, half in the light. Now, this beautiful vine here is Solanum evolvifolium. I'll just make sure I have the names down below. This is another plant I have a ton of in my grow out boxes. It can take a little while initially to get acclimated, but once it gets going, it's off. Here's some Peperomia prostrata. Tuck it in here. I like how it grows up, grows down, spreads all over real nicely. This is Ficus Panama. Whoever named it Panama, brilliant idea. It's from Malaysia, so yeah, there's that. I've got a ton of this in my 450, so clippings for life on these. And gotta have an orchid. So this is Lutetia discolor. I've also got a ton of this stuff. I bought one plant and now I don't even know how many I have. It's gonna be a little while before I have anything in this enclosure, so I'm sure by then the roots will come out and it'll attach itself just fine. And of course, if you've watched any of my previous videos, you know how much I love moss, so yeah, why not? Let's just add some more moss. And that's it for the planting. So this is live oak leaf litter. I get it off of Etsy. The shop I go to, it's like 26 bucks, I think, for 3 gallons, which won't even get you a gallon at a lot of these online reptile stores I've seen. So well worth it. And now leaf litter's done. I'm going to give everything a good soaking with some RO water. And of course, no bioactive setup is complete without the bioactive part. So today, as usual, I'm adding in the springtails and dwarf white isopods. And the last thing I'm going to do to complete this setup is replace that terrible screen top on the Exo Terra, which doesn't hold any humidity in. And with that, that is a wrap on this video. I just want to say thank you to everyone who subscribed and watched these videos. I really love doing this, and I really love sharing it with everyone. And by the way, what animal should I put in here? Thinking like a dwarf gecko or something, but I'm not sure. So go ahead and leave a comment in the comment section and let me know your opinions on what you think I should put in here. So until next week, see ya.